there, and welcome back to our weekend reflection, basically around the gospel that helps us while our churches are locked up, that we can gather in all sorts of homely settings for a reflection on the Word. We're doing the Matthew's Gospel at the moment and for the whole of this year, and we're up to a very strong set of instructions that follow on from the Sermon on the Mount. So Margaret will read the Gospel now, where Jesus is giving instructions to his followers.
A reading of the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus called the 12 to him and sent them out with the following instructions. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward, and whoever welcomes a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will receive the reward of the righteous. And whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward. The Gospel of the Lord.
Wow, what a sort of jarring note to have in a gospel where you're supposed to hate your mother or father or your brother or your sister. Now, what all that is about, and I'm sure you've picked it, is it's a style of Jewish hyperbole where you exaggerate in order to make a point. The point being is not to, if you're a follower of Jesus, not to hate parents or a sibling, but it's getting at your priority in affection and bonding firstly has to be to the way of the Lord. Now, just to make that come together a bit better, when the followers of Jesus in Jerusalem, now that it's a conservative mob in Jerusalem, they're guided pretty early by James, who's fairly heavy-handed, and James will take no rot, and he really demands a fairly structured community, whereas not much later Paul comes along, and I'm sure James just couldn't wait for him to fade. You could almost say drop dead, but we shouldn't. So, when the community starts to follow the way of the Nazarene, and they claim that he has risen from the dead, has returned to his God, to the Father, and he now is, Paul would explain very actually earlier than Matthew's Gospel being written, that Jesus has emptied himself out to be amongst us, but has now assumed his dignity and power with his God. So, the situation is that some Jewish people have come across from the synagogue and the temple and are following in the way of Jesus. Others in the family have stayed with the old Jewish faith. And older people watching this morning will remember the sad days in this country when we were very divided as Christians. And there was terrible trouble at the time of marriages because The whole issue was, is it going to be at the Catholic Church or the Methodist Church or the Anglican Church? And there were terrible stories of hurt and disruption in families, all because of allegiance or devotion to one Christian tradition than another. It's almost gone now, and certainly in terms of wedding days. But that's the sort of tension that there was in Matthew's community. There was enormous strife in families about calling one another heretics and unworthy, and they'd go to hell, and all sorts of horrible name calling that stood for this notion of tension that was in Matthew's community. So what Matthew has Jesus address there is that follow the way of the Lord. And of course he puts it into that very Jewish style of, and you'll have to hate the others. But remember, don't take it literally. Also, where the scholars debate about did the historical Jesus ever talk about the cross? He certainly talked about, and in Matthew's Gospel, talks about as he goes to Jerusalem, the Son of Man will suffer and die. But it wasn't, I suspect, till after the crucifixion. And remember, all the Gospels are written not just after the crucifixion, but the resurrection, that the literature in Matthew said, you will have to take up your cross and follow me. And it's the whole symbol that is so strong in Matthew, that you can be devout, but there will be consequences for your faith. Now, another very important thing to understand in Matthew's Gospel is that he spots a problem. The problem is this, that there are scribes and Pharisees in the new community that follow the way of Jesus. In Matthew's Gospel, in particular, you have Jesus spitting out at the scribes and Pharisees. But to Matthew's horror, he notices, oh my God, they're here. Not spies coming over, but a fundamental attitude that has a hard heart and is righteous, self-righteous and destructive. What Matthew does, he's a teacher, remember, he brings into his gospel some instructions, reflections of being kind. So we get that beautiful line about taking the cup of water and offering it to the little ones. After the sad process of the Royal Commission into sexual abuse of children by the church, we can take that very seriously. We have to offer more than a cup of water. There has to be hope and healing, and particularly for the broken child who now may be quite old as an adult. But also in the reading, there is that sense of hospitality and welcome. It's the softness as opposed to the firmness of faith. It's the softness of the heart. It's the call to get beyond ideology to faith. Now, all those things are very much in the mix of Matthew's Gospel, which is going through the very delicate transition from the synagogue and the temple to the house church. And it's there that there's these tensions in families and in broader groups of people about who is correct, who is authentic. See, it's interesting that really, while it says in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says, I have come to care for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Really, the Jewish mission is not a successful one for all sorts of reasons. Paul, who goes to the Gentiles, is an overwhelming success. Today in the Middle East, there's parts, particularly of old Persia, where Christians on the plains of Nineveh and various old towns that we've heard sadly mentioned in news more recent times, that would be in Syria and Turkey, right up through Iraq and so on. That would have been Babylon, Mesopotamia. People there became Christian, but by and large in the land of Palestine there wasn't a strong surviving Christian community. So what we're seeing in today's part from Matthew are some of the dilemmas and tensions as we adjust to new times, new places. And it's nice to sort of see that seesaw of balance, the balance between to put the Lord first, remember, not the mother, father, sister, brother, and secondly, with that priority of faith, there will come a kindness that is aware of the one who thirsts, or the one who is broken and an outsider who's welcomed in. There is the softness of the heart. So that gives us some sort of insight into issues then and now for us. Just over the last few days, a thing that happens a lot in the parish, people ring and say it's Dad or my brother or an aunt's anniversary of death. And the custom at St Carthage's is that each week we remember, I keep a diary of any of the people who have funerals here during the year. And of course, over the years I've been here, it's quite a number. People really appreciate when a loved one, whether it's a child or a grandparent or a brother or whatever, is mentioned. So I the other day when Tony Whelan, whose anniversary occurs this weekend's anniversary, I was prompted in an email to keep Tony in my prayer, just to assure you all that as I look at the list each week in the diary, it makes me sort of drop to the knees for a moment and pray for those who have gone before us. So that's all for this week. We look forward to having you back next week when we'll explore another vital part of Matthew's Gospel. Goodbye. God bless you.